How does a retirement dinner turn into the moment a father publicly erases his own son in front of everyone? Why did my dad tell me to leave while our family and his employees clapped for him? What did my wife say after that? And how did those few calm words end up deciding who really owned his company and his legacy? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Mark Hayes, and the night my father tried to erase me started with a name card at the wrong table. The retirement dinner was held in one of those big hotel ballrooms downtown. White tablecloths, fake golden chairs, the kind of place he always liked. My father, Edward Hayes, loved anything that looked expensive and loud. When my wife, Laura, and I walked in, I already knew I did not belong there. I could feel it in how the host glanced at the guest list, paused over my name, and then pointed us toward a table near the back, close to the kitchen doors. I looked around as we walked. At the center, near the stage, was the family table. I saw my younger brother Ryan in his perfect suit, talking loudly with two men from the board. My sister Chloe was laughing with her husband, her dress bright under the spotlights. My father sat at the head of that table, shaking hands, smiling, patting people on the back. When he saw Ryan, his face lit up. When his eyes slid over me, I got a quick nod, nothing more. Laura squeezed my hand. She told me quietly that it was okay, that we would just sit, eat, and leave early if it got bad. That was our usual plan at my father's events. Stay small, don't draw attention. Let him play king with the people who believed in that game. I told her I was fine. I had told myself the same thing in the car all the way there. Our table was mixed with people who did not know where to place me, a couple of mid-level managers, one of their wives, and an older salesman who kept checking his phone. Their name cards had titles under them. Mine just had my name, no Reynolds Industrial Supply after it. No job title, nothing. I saw one manager glance at it and then at me. He asked in a polite voice if I still worked at the company. I said that I was a high school history teacher now. He smiled in that careful way people use when they do not know what to say. On the screens around the room, a slideshow ran with old photos of my father. Him as a young man in front of the first warehouse. Him cutting ribbons. Him shaking hands with local politicians. The room hummed with the low buzz of small talk and polite laughter. Every now and then, I saw someone recognize me, squint for a moment, and then look away. The last time most of them had seen me, I was still in a company polo shirt, helping on the plant floor. When the servers brought the first course, Ryan stood up and tapped his glass. He announced that it was time for the tribute video he had prepared for our father. The lights dimmed and music started. The video played like a commercial. Bold white letters over dramatic shots of machines, trucks, and my father giving speeches. It called him a visionary, a self-made man, a leader of men. The video said that he had built all of this with his own two hands and the support of his loyal children. There were old family photos mixed in. I watched my childhood flash by on the screens. There was one quick shot of the three of us kids when we were little. Then the images shifted. Ryan at a trade show, Chloe at a charity gala, my father giving him an award, my father walking her down a red carpet. When it came to me, the voiceover used a strange phrase. It said that one of his children had chosen a different path, and the screen flashed a single distant photo of me at my college graduation. No sound, no title, and then moved on. Laura turned her head and looked at me in the dark. She did not need to say anything. I gave a small shrug, as if it did not matter. But in my chest, something tight and familiar twisted a little harder. That was how it always went. Ryan, the strong one, Chloe, the charming one, me, the one who stepped away. When the video ended, the room clapped. The lights came back up, and the MC started talking about my father's legacy. He joked about how hard it must be to retire from something you love so much. My father sat there, smiling, acting humble, but I knew that he was drinking all of it in. I had grown up watching that same expression whenever people praised him in public. After dinner, the MC called my father up for his main speech. My father stood, adjusted his tie, and walked to the podium like he owned not just the company, but the room, the hotel, and maybe the whole city. People clapped, some stood, a little wave of applause followed him all the way. He started as I expected. He thanked everyone. He talked about coming from nothing. He said that he had worked harder than anyone else, that he had made sacrifices, that he had never taken a day off. He loved these lines. I could almost say them along with him. The crowd laughed at his old jokes. He talked about starting in a small metal shed and turning it into a regional giant. Then he shifted to what he called the second generation. He said that every great man is measured by the children he raises. He said that he had 3 children, and that life had taught him that not all children choose to carry their father's name with the same strength. The room got quieter. He said that 2 of his children had honored everything he stood for. He praised Ryan's numbers, his deals, his growth charts. He praised Chloe's social presence, her charity work, the way she made the family look good. People turned to look at them and clapped. Then he mentioned that sometimes a child walks away. He said that some people are born into a family but never really join it. He said that he had 1 child like that. I felt the air around me change. My shoulders started to feel heavy. At my table, the managers shifted in their chairs. No one looked at me straight on. My father did not use my name. He did not have to. He said that real sons and daughters stand beside their father in the arena. He said that some people prefer to hide in quiet jobs and make excuses. He said that he had decided, at this stage of his life, to be honest. He announced that the children who met his expectations were truly his, and the ones who did not could not claim what they had not earned. There was an awkward pause. Then a few people clapped, because that is what people do when a man at a podium says something in a firm voice. My father let the sound roll over him. Then he turned his head slowly, eyes moving across the room until they found me at the back table. He lifted his chin like a judge delivering a sentence and told me that if I felt out of place, I was free to leave, because this night was for those who had carried their weight. For a second, nothing moved. I felt my face get warm. The old salesman at our table stared at his napkin. One manager took a sudden interest in his water glass. I could feel people's eyes on the back of my neck, even as they pretended to look elsewhere. The clapping had stopped. The speakers hummed softly in the silence that followed his words. I did what I had trained myself to do for years. I swallowed hard, nodded a little as if I understood, and pushed my chair back. I told myself that it was better not to make a scene. Better to be the one who leaves quietly than the one who begs to stay. I stood up slowly. My hands felt strangely light, as if they were not mine. I could feel Laura rise next to me, but at first I thought she was just following. I picked up my jacket from the back of my chair. I kept my eyes on the floor as I turned, ready to walk out between the tables and forget this whole night. I told myself that I had expected something like this. I told myself that it did not hurt as much as it once would have. All lies, but they helped me move. Before I could take a step, Laura's hand left my arm. She straightened her back, and her voice carried across the tables. She did not shout. She did not need to. The room was already quiet, waiting to see what the disappointing son would do. I heard her say that if I was not truly part of this family, then she was not either, and any child tied to my name would not be either. She said that she would not sit and smile while her husband was treated like a stranger in front of strangers. She said that respect worked both ways, even in families with big names on buildings. I watched faces turn toward us. Some people looked shocked. Some looked entertained. Ryan stared, his jaw tight. Chloe looked between my father and us, unsure which direction to take. My father stood at the podium, his mouth pressed into a hard line, eyes narrowed. He reached for the microphone, but Laura had already said enough. She turned back to me, her face steady. I could see that she was angry, but her anger was clean, like a line drawn on a page, not wild, not messy, just final. She took my hand. I realized that in that whole room, hers was the only hand reaching for me. We walked out together, past tables of people who made themselves small in their chairs, suddenly fascinated by their phones or by the dessert plates the servers were setting down. A few workers from the plant, people who knew me from years back, met my eyes with quick, guilty sympathy. One of them gave me the smallest nod, like an apology for something he had not done. As we passed the doorway, I heard chairs scrape behind us. Not many. Just enough to know that some people were following, not because they supported me, but because they smelled drama. I saw screens raised, little red recording lights blinking. In the reflection of the glass doors, I saw my father still standing at the microphone, too far away to hear, but clearly trying to take control of the room again. Out in the hallway, the hotel felt colder. The sound from the ballroom dulled down to a low murmur behind the closed doors. The coat check girl's eyes widened when she saw us, still in our seats' place cards, leaving this early. She did not ask. She just started pulling coats from the rack. Laura's phone buzzed in her hand as she reached for her scarf. She glanced down at the screen, then showed it to me. Someone at one of the front tables had already forwarded a video clip of my father's speech to the family group chat. The caption under it was short and sharp. It asked if everyone had heard what he had just said about his eldest son. When we got home that night, the house felt smaller than usual. I hung up my jacket in the hallway and realized my hands were shaking. Not a lot, just enough that I had to take a breath before I went into the living room. Laura put her bag down on the coffee table and asked if I wanted to watch the clip. I said that I had just lived through it, so I already knew what he had said. She told me that in the clip it sounded even worse. That was not something I wanted to hear, but I sat down anyway. She opened the family group chat on her phone and pressed play. Someone had filmed from close to the stage. I could see my father's face in sharp detail on the screen. I watched him talk about real sons and real daughters, about expectations, about carrying weight. I heard the room laugh in the wrong places. I heard my own name not spoken, but still cut out of his life in front of everyone. The camera shifted just enough to catch my table in the background. I saw myself stand up. I looked smaller than I felt. I watched Laura stand with me, shoulders straight, head high. Even in the low phone resolution, I could see the moment her words hit the room and the laughter died. There was something almost clean about that silence. When the clip ended, Laura sat very still. She said that she had wanted to say more, to tell them all exactly what she thought, but that was all she could get out without shaking. I told her that it was enough, more than enough. I said that nobody had ever spoken for me like that in front of my father. We talked for a long time that night. Not loud, not dramatic, just slow, tired sentences. She listed all the times over the years when my father had cut me down. The Christmas when he gave Ryan a watch and gave me a book on self-improvement. The birthday dinner where he toasted Ryan's promotion and forgot mine completely. The way he always asked me when I would come back to real work, around the plant. I realized I had trained myself not to see those moments clearly. I had filed them away as small things, as jokes, as old man habits. It was easier to do that than to admit that my own father did not respect the life I had built. At some point, Laura went to bed. I stayed on the couch with the TV off and the house dark. I replayed old scenes in my head, like a second slideshow. I remembered myself at 22, fresh out of college, working at Reynolds Industrial. I had wanted to learn everything, so I asked to start on the plant floor. My father had not liked that. He told me that the son of the owner did not need to wear a hard hat. I told him that I wanted to understand where the money actually came from, how the machines worked, who kept the place running at 3 a.m. For a while, those were good days. I learned from guys who had been there longer than I had been alive. People like Tom, the plant manager, who showed me how production schedules and real life rarely matched, and how you had to listen to the older operators if you wanted the lines to keep moving. On breaks, we sat on overturned crates and drank bad coffee. They talked about their kids. I talked about nothing important and tried to be one of them. My father did not like those breaks. He would walk through the plant in his pressed shirt, see me laughing with the crew, and later tell me that I was wasting time. He said that leaders did not stand around with workers. They drove numbers in the office. When I tried to show him what I was learning, he brushed it off. He said that spreadsheets mattered more than stories about broken machines. It got worse when Ryan joined the company. Ryan went straight into sales and finance. My father loved that. They went on trips together. They talked about deals and margins. When they walked through the plant, my father would put a hand on Ryan's shoulder and say in a loud voice that this was the future of the company. If I was nearby, he would look at me and say that some people were born for the front office and some were not. Back then, I still thought I could prove him wrong. I stayed late. I volunteered for projects nobody wanted. When a machine broke down at 2 a.m, I answered my phone and went in to help. The plant workers trusted me, even if my father did not. The night everything changed was not loud. It was just another meeting. We were in a small conference room, going over a problem with quality control. I suggested investing in better training for the line workers and updating some old equipment. My father stared at me as if I had said something stupid on purpose. He said that we did not throw money at people who should already know how to do their jobs. He said that if the plant was weak, it was because I was weak. After that meeting, I went back to my office and sat there until the cleaning crew came in. I looked at the company logo on my wall. For the first time, I let myself imagine a different life, one where my worth did not depend on a man who never seemed to see it. When I told my father that I wanted to leave the company and become a teacher, he looked at me like I had confessed some crime. He said that I was turning my back on my family. He said that he had not raised a son to hide in a classroom. He said that if I walked away, I should not expect to be treated like the other two ever again. I walked away anyway. Teaching did not make me rich. It did not put my name on any buildings, but it felt real to me. Standing in front of students who had messy lives and short attention spans, trying to explain wars and empires and cause and effect, I felt more honest than I ever had in a boardroom. Sometimes, when I told my classes about history, I slipped in small stories from the plant. I would explain how decisions at the top affected people at the bottom. I would talk about leaders who listened and leaders who did not. The kids liked those stories. They understood unfairness better than any adult. The Monday after the retirement dinner, I walked into my classroom and tried to be just Mr. Hayes again. I wrote the date on the board. My hand shook a little, but the students were half asleep and did not notice at first. During break, one of my students, Nora, stayed behind to finish a worksheet. Her dad worked at the plant. She had dark circles under her eyes, like she had not slept much. As she handed in her paper, she said that she had seen a video over the weekend. She said that someone had posted a clip of a man who sounded like me being told by his dad that he was not really part of the family. She asked in a careful voice if that had been me. I felt the air leave my lungs for a second. I told her that it was a family matter and that I was okay. She nodded and said that her dad and his friends at the plant thought it was wrong, what the boss had said. She said that her dad had told her that some bosses forget who helped build their empire and who still keeps it from falling. Then she shrugged, like she had said too much, and asked if I could check her essay grade. After she left, I sat at my desk and stared at the wall map of Europe. I had spent years telling my students that power was never as simple as it looked from the outside. Now I was on the other side of that lesson. Later that week, I drove to the plant after school. I told myself I was just going to say hello to old faces, but that was not the whole truth. I wanted to see how people there saw my father now. The plant smelled the same as always: oil, metal, and coffee. The machines sounded like they always had, a low, steady rumble under everything. When I walked in, a few heads turned. Some of the older guys smiled and waved. One of them clapped me on the shoulder and said that he had seen the video and that I had handled it better than he would have. I found Tom near a control panel, looking at production numbers. He greeted me like an old friend and asked how life in the classroom was treating me. We talked about nothing for a while, safe topics like sports and weather. Then his face changed, and he said that the retirement dinner had not gone down well on the plant floor. He said that a lot of people had watched that clip and felt like they had seen too much of the man they worked for. Tom also said that my father and Ryan were brushing it off. They were telling people that it was just a joke, that everyone was too sensitive these days. Tom rolled his eyes when he said that. He told me that men who humiliates their own sons in public usually do not respect anyone else either. Hearing him say that hurt and helped at the same time. On the weekend, Chloe invited us to brunch at a trendy place she liked. It was one of those restaurants with avocado on everything and music that was too loud to talk over easily. She said that she wanted to clear the air. That was how she put it in her message. When we arrived, Ryan and his wife were already there. Chloe ordered expensive coffee and talked about the gala my father was planning next, something called a Legacy and Leadership Night. She said that it would be huge, with clients, local officials, maybe even press. She sounded excited. At first, they pretended the retirement speech had been nothing. Then, slowly, the comments came out. Ryan said that my father could be harsh, but that he was only honest. Chloe said that I knew how Dad was and that it was better not to take it so personally. Ryan said that if I had stayed in the business, I would have been on that front stage instead of sitting in the back. He said that choices had consequences. They talked about inheritance without using that word. They talked about who would take care of our father in his old age, who would earn certain things. When Laura tried to say that respect should not be something you had to earn from your own parent with quarterly numbers, they brushed it off. They said that she did not understand what it was like to build something from nothing. Chloe ended brunch by saying that it would probably be better if I skipped the next big company event. She said that these things were for the people who were closest to the business now. She said that it might be awkward for me. She smiled when she said it, like she was doing me a favor. We stood to leave, and I pulled my phone from my pocket to check the time. As I did, a new notification slid down the screen. It was an email from an old company distribution list that I had never been removed from. The subject line said, "Internal invitation, CEO appointment announcement." The message preview showed a date, a time, and one line that said, "All family members welcome to attend." The email sat at the top of my inbox all afternoon, even while I pretended not to see it. Internal invitation, CEO appointment announcement. Under it, the sender was still the same old Reynolds Industrial Distribution list. Somehow, no one had ever removed my address, even after I left. Maybe it was one more sign that they did not think about me much at all. On the drive home from brunch, I kept glancing at red lights and thinking about that subject line. My father liked big symbols. The retirement dinner had been one. A CEO announcement with an internal crowd would be another. He liked rooms full of people clapping at the right moments. At home, Laura read the email over my shoulder. It said that all senior staff and key partners were invited to the headquarters boardroom on Friday afternoon for the formal announcement of the new CEO. At the bottom was a line thrown in like an afterthought. All adult family members welcome to attend. Laura asked if I was going. I told her that I had not decided. She reminded me that nothing good had come from the last event. I said, half joking, that at least this one did not involve microphones and hotel ballrooms. The truth was, I wanted to see it with my own eyes. Not for Ryan, not for my father. I just wanted to stand in that room once more and see what I had walked away from. On Friday, after my last class, I changed out of my shirt and tie in the staff bathroom and put on the only suit I still owned that fit. It was a little tight across the shoulders. I looked at myself in the mirror for a moment. I did not look like the son of a rich man. I looked like a tired teacher in a decent suit. The Reynolds Industrial Headquarters had not changed much from the outside. The building was still a block of glass and steel, with the company name in big letters across the front. The parking lot was full of shiny company cars and a few old trucks from longtime staff. I parked my aging sedan at the back and walked in through the main doors. The receptionist looked up when I entered. For a second, her face went blank, like she was trying to place me. Then she smiled and said that it had been a long time. She told me that the boardroom was already filling up. She handed me a visitor badge instead of the old access card I once had. It felt heavier than it should. The boardroom was on the top floor. I remembered the exact number of steps from the elevator to the door. My shoes made the same soft sounds on the carpet that they always had. When I walked in, conversations paused for a heartbeat, then smoothed out again. People saw me, registered me, and shifted slightly away, as if my name might be contagious. Most of the seats around the long table were already taken by directors, managers, and a couple of outside advisors. Ryan sat near the head of the table, joking with one of the board members. My father stood by the windows, looking out over the parking lot with his hands behind his back, as if he were surveying land he had conquered. There was no place card for me. I did not expect one. I found a chair along the wall with the other non-essential people, an IT manager, an HR assistant, a junior lawyer I did not know. They nodded at me with polite smiles. I nodded back. On the big screen at the front of the room, a slide deck was open. At the top, it said, Reynolds Industrial, Legacy and Leadership. Under that, 3 images sat side by side. On the left, my father in front of the first warehouse. In the middle, a photo of him and Ryan shaking hands at a trade show. On the right, a picture of him and Chloe at some charity event, both of them laughing in evening clothes. That was the whole family section. I was not in a single picture. The meeting started with a short speech from the board chair. He talked about my father's years of service, about growth, about challenges. The words blurred together. I had heard them in some form at every annual meeting I had ever attended. After a few minutes, he shifted to the future. He said that it was time to pass the torch, to hand leadership to the next generation, to someone who understood the founder's vision. He called my father up. My father made a few proud, heavy comments about responsibility and blood. He said that true family stands shoulder to shoulder in hard times. He did not look at me once. Then he announced Ryan as the new CEO. Everyone clapped. Some people looked truly happy. Others looked like they were clapping because that was what the room demanded. Ryan stood, smiled, and shook my father's hand for the cameras. A staff member near the door snapped pictures. The flash reflected in the glass behind them. The slide changed to a graphic labeled The 3 Pillars. It showed 3 tall bars. One was labeled Founder, Edward Hayes. Another was Future CEO, Ryan Hayes. The third was Brand and Community, Chloe Mercer, Hayes. Underneath, a line ran that said, The Hayes Legacy. I stared at the screen. I thought of how, when we were kids, my father used to line us up by height for photos. I had always been tallest. Now, on his legacy slide, I did not exist at all. After the formal announcement, people stood and moved around to shake hands, to say congratulations, to swap jokes about new responsibilities. I stayed in my chair by the wall, watching. I saw Tom in the back of the room, standing near the door, hands in his pockets. He gave me a small nod. There was sympathy in it, but also something else, something like respect. As the crowd started to thin, Ryan walked over to me. His smile was still on his face, but there was a different light in his eyes. He said that he was surprised I had come. He said that after the dinner, he had thought I would stay away from company events. I told him that the invitation said all family members were welcome. He laughed softly and said that of course I was family, but that these days, family in business meant the people who were really in it, not the ones who taught high school history on the side. I felt the words land, but I did not react. He went on. He said that Dad had needed to send a message at the retirement dinner to show the people in the room that only strong players got to stand at his side. He said that I had made my choice years ago when I left the company, and that I should not be surprised that I was no longer part of the picture. Then he said something that stuck. He said that if I felt hurt, it was probably because I still wanted something from our father that I was never going to get. He said that it might be better for everyone if I stopped showing up, stopped confusing people, and let the real heirs handle things. I looked at him and realized that he truly believed what he was saying. In his mind, I had given up my right to be my father's son when I had walked out of the office all those years ago. Biology did not matter to him. Loyalty meant staying under our father's thumb. I left the building without saying goodbye to my father. As I walked through the parking lot, I thought about the word heir. I thought about who got to decide who counted and who did not. That evening, I drove to my parents' house. I told myself that I just wanted to talk, but it felt more like walking into a familiar courtroom where I knew the judge was not on my side. Their house was large and carefully arranged, every surface polished, every photo placed exactly where my father wanted it. In the living room were framed magazine covers, plaques, certificates. In the study, which he used more for show than for work now, the walls were lined with books he rarely read and more awards. He was sitting at the desk when I went in, a glass of something dark on the coaster, reading an email on his tablet. He did not stand when I entered. He asked in a flat voice what he could do for me, as if I were a supplier asking for more time on a delivery. I said that I wanted to talk about the retirement dinner and about what he had said. I told him that it had crossed a line. I told him that I could accept that we disagreed about my life choices, but that telling a room full of people that I was not truly his was something else. He listened, then set his tablet down. He said that he had only said what everyone already knew. He said that in his mind, a real son was one who stood beside him in the business, who carried his work forward, who did not run off to teach kids how to complain about history. He said that I was his son by blood, yes, but that real family was built on shared purpose. He did not apologize. He did not soften. In fact, he pushed further. He said that he was already thinking about how to structure things so that his estate reflected his real family. He said that he did not intend to reward disloyalty. He mentioned that Ryan and Chloe would be taken care of in ways that matched their contributions. I asked him directly if he was planning to cut me out of his will. He said that it was his right to decide who deserved what. He said that I had made it easy for him by walking away. There was a framed photo on the cabinet behind him. It showed my grandparents, John and Eleanor Hayes, standing in front of a much smaller building, the first version of Reynolds Industrial, long before it grew into what it is now. My grandmother's eyes in the picture were sharp and kind, even in black and white. I stared at that photo while my father talked about winners and losers. As I looked at it, a memory came back that I had not thought about in years. I was 18, just out of high school. My grandmother had taken me downtown one afternoon to a small law office. She said that there were some papers I needed to sign, something to do with the future of the company. My father had not been happy about it. He had called it her little safety net project and said that she worried too much. In the lawyer's office, everything smelled like paper and coffee. A woman with gray hair and quiet eyes had explained that they were formalizing something called the Hayes Holding Trust. She had said that it was meant to protect the family business for future generations. She had used words like trustee and beneficiary. At 18, I had not really understood. I had just signed where they told me to sign, because my grandmother had squeezed my hand and said that it was important. Now, sitting in my father's study with his cold words hanging in the air, I wondered what exactly I had signed that day. I did not say any of this to him. There was no point. He had already decided who I was in his story. I left his house with his last sentence still repeating in my head, the one where he said that, going forward, only the children who met his expectations would stand under his name. At home that night, I went straight past the living room and into the garage. The air in there was cooler, smelling of dust and cardboard. Along one wall were old boxes from when we moved into the house. I knew that somewhere in there were things from my grandparents that I had never sorted properly. Laura came to the doorway and asked what I was doing. I told her that I was looking for something I should have paid attention to a long time ago. After half an hour of moving boxes and pulling out old photo albums, I found a thin, flat envelope with an old law firm logo on it. Inside was a short letter addressed to me at 18, written by that same lawyer whose name I now remembered, Margaret Green. The letter thanked me for meeting about the Hayes Holding Trust, noted that I had been named in certain roles, and said that copies of the formal documents were held at her office and at the bank. There was one line that stuck out. It said that the trust had been designed to ensure that no child of the Hayes bloodline could be carelessly cast aside in matters of legacy. My grandmother's phrase, I was sure. I sat on an overturned crate and read that line 3 times. My father had always acted like his will was the only thing that mattered, but this trust had been set up before he took full control. It had been built by people who thought further ahead than he did. For years, I had accepted that he owned everything, the company, the story, the right to define who his real family was. Now, in my hands, was proof that there was at least one place where his power might have limits. I felt something change in me then. It was not anger, not the hot rush I had expected. It was quieter than that, like fog lifting off a field in the morning, slowly revealing what was always there. I saw my father not as a giant, but as a man who had been given a structure by his parents and had forgotten that he did not create all of it himself. I went back inside and pulled out my old contacts. It had been years, but I still had Margaret Green's name in my phone from some estate discussion long ago. I scrolled through until I found it. My thumb hovered over the call button for a long moment. Then I pressed it. The call went to voicemail. I left a short, calm message telling her who I was and that I had questions about a trust she had set up when I was 18. A few minutes later, as I sat at the kitchen table with the old letter in front of me, an email popped up on my screen. It was an automatic reply from her office, confirming an appointment for the following Tuesday afternoon. On Tuesday afternoon, I left school early with a note in for the office that said I had a personal appointment. It felt strange to write those words. For years, everything in my life had moved around my father's schedule. Now I was walking into something he did not control. Margaret Green's office was downtown in an older building with stone steps and heavy glass doors. The plaque by the entrance listed several small firms. Hers was on the second floor. When I stepped into the lobby, the air smelled like paper and polish, the same way it had all those years ago when my grandmother brought me here. The receptionist looked up and asked who I was there to see. I gave my name and said that I had an appointment with Margaret. She checked her screen and told me to take a seat. I sat in a chair by the window and watched traffic move slowly outside. My hands were resting on my knees, but my shoulders were tight. A few minutes later, a woman in a dark blazer came out from the hallway. She had gray in her hair now, more than I remembered, but the same steady eyes. She greeted me, said it had been a long time, and asked me to come back to her conference room. The room was not big, just a long table, a few chairs, a wall of shelves with binders. On the table was a slim file with my name on it. She sat down across from me and folded her hands, then said that she remembered my grandparents very well. She told me that my grandmother had been the one who pushed for more structure in the family business. I said that I had found her old letter about the Hayes Holding Trust and wanted to understand what it actually meant. I told her, as calmly as I could, what my father had said at the retirement dinner and after. I did not repeat his exact words, but I made sure she understood the idea, that he had publicly said I was not truly his in any way that mattered. Margaret listened without interrupting, only asking short questions now and then to be sure she had the timeline right. Then she opened the file in front of her. She took out a copy of the trust summary and said that she would explain the structure in simple terms. She said that the Hayes Holding Trust owned the controlling block of shares in Reynolds Industrial. That meant that whoever had the voting power in the trust could decide who ran the company and how certain assets were handled. She said that my grandfather had set it up that way so that no one person could sell the company on a whim. She pointed out that my father was the primary beneficiary and trustee during his lifetime, but not the only one named in the documents. She showed me where my name appeared as a successor co-trustee and contingent beneficiary. She said that this had been my grandmother's condition, that there be a second line of control if she felt that family values were being broken. I asked what that actually meant in practice. I said that my father seemed sure he could cut me out of everything whenever he wanted. Margaret shook her head slightly and said that, when it came to the trust, there were rules he did not write, and could not simply ignore. She reminded me that a will and a trust were not the same thing. She turned to a page and tapped it with her finger. She said that there was a specific clause my grandmother had insisted on, something they had called, in their own words, a family respect condition. The formal language was longer and colder, but the idea was simple. If a primary beneficiary publicly rejected a legitimate child as part of the family, and if that pattern was clear and repeated, the co-trustees and the firm could review that person's control and, if needed, limit it. I asked her to repeat that, just to be sure I had heard it right. She did, this time slower. She said that the clause had never been used before. Most families never needed it. In ours, my grandmother had thought it wise. I asked what counted as public and what counted as rejection under that clause. Margaret said that it was not about one slip of the tongue at a small dinner. It was about patterns. It meant statements made in front of others, confirmed by behavior repeated without regret. She said that recordings, written messages, and witness accounts all mattered. Then she looked at me and asked if what happened at the retirement dinner had been recorded. I told her that it had. I described the video in the family chat, the clips Nora had seen, the way workers at the plant had shared it. She nodded and wrote some notes. She asked if my father had repeated his position later. I told her about our talk in his study, about how he had spoken of real children and his plans for his estate. She sat back in her chair for a moment and went quiet. Then she said that, on the surface, it sounded like the respect clause might be relevant. She warned me that invoking it was a serious step. It would not be a private family disagreement anymore. It would be a formal action that could change who controlled the trust, and with it, the company. I said that I understood. I told her that for most of my life, I had accepted that my father got to decide what I was worth. I said that I was not looking for revenge, but that I was tired of being treated like a stranger by a man who was standing on ground my grandparents had prepared for all of us. Margaret told me that the first thing we needed was evidence, organized clearly. She said that if I wanted to move forward, I should gather all recordings, messages, and any written statements that showed this pattern. She promised that she would request full copies of the trust documents and recent statements from the bank so we could see exactly how things stood. Before I left, she asked me one more time what I wanted the end result to be. She was not talking about money. She was talking about control, about who got to steer the legacy. I told her honestly that I did not know all the details yet. I just knew that my father should not be allowed to use the family name as a weapon against his own child in public and still call himself the rightful guardian of that same name. She nodded and said that this was enough to start from. We set a time to meet again once the documents and evidence were in order. As I walked out of her office, I felt the weight of what we were doing. It was not loud. It was heavy and quiet, like a thick door closing. My next stop was the bank branch that handled the trust. The lobby was bright and cold, with rows of chairs and a long counter. I gave my name to the clerk and said I needed information on the Hayes Holding Trust. At first, she looked cautious, but when she checked her system, something changed in her tone. She saw my role attached to the file and treated me with a level of respect I had rarely felt when dealing with anything tied to the company. She said that she could not discuss details in the open lobby, but that she could provide certified copies of certain pages and send others directly to Margaret's office. I signed a request form, and she stamped it and said that the documents would be ready soon. As I left, she said something simple. She said that my grandparents had been very careful people, that they had thought ahead. It was a small sentence, but it stayed with me. Back at school, I started working on the other half of Margaret's advice: evidence. After classes, when the halls were empty and the late afternoon light made long stripes on the floor, I stayed in my classroom with the door closed. I loaded the retirement dinner video onto my laptop and watched it again, this time with a notebook open. I paused and rewound, writing down exact phrases, the order of my father's words, the reaction of the room. I noted the number of people in the shot, the table placements, the fact that this was not a private moment at home, but a public speech in front of staff, clients, and extended family. I saved screenshots and timestamps. I backed everything up to a separate drive. Years of teaching had trained me well in how to organize information so that any stranger could follow it. At one point, I was so focused that I did not hear someone knock. The door opened a crack, and Nora stepped in, holding a folder. She said that the office had asked her to drop off some forms for the history club. Then she looked at the screen and recognized the paused frame from the video. She went quiet for a moment, then said that the guys at the plant were still talking about that speech. She said that her dad had told her it made some of them see the boss differently, that if he could treat his own son that way, he probably did not think much of them either. She looked at me like she was afraid she had crossed a line. I told her that it was okay, that I appreciated her honesty. I said that sometimes adults forget that other people are watching when they try to show off their power. She nodded and added that her dad had said one more thing, that they would remember how I had walked out quietly and how my wife had stood up. After she left, I sat for a long time with that thought. My father believed that respect only flowed up, toward him. He had no idea that, while he was busy building his image, people below were taking notes too. Later that week, Laura and I went to a small diner not far from the plant. It was one of those places with cracked leather booths and a waitress who knew everyone's usual order. I had asked Tom if he had time to meet after his shift, and he had agreed. He arrived still in his work boots, oil on his sleeves. He ordered coffee and listened while I explained in simple terms that there were old legal structures around the company that my father did not control as fully as he thought. I did not give details. I just said that the way he had spoken at the dinner might have consequences beyond hurt feelings. Tom leaned back and let out a slow breath. He said that it was about time someone in the family remembered that the company was bigger than one man's temper. He told me that the workers were tired. They had watched my father grow harder and less patient every year. The retirement speech had felt to them like he was talking to everyone who was not a winner, not just to me. He said that people had started sharing the video in a private online group for longtime employees. Some were angry, some were just shaking their heads. A few were even wondering if it was time to look for work somewhere else before the new CEO made things worse. He told me that whatever I decided to do, there were more eyes on the Hayes family than my father realized. When Laura and I left the diner, the sky was already dark. The streetlights made shiny pools on the wet pavement. As we walked to the car, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from a social media app I almost never used. Someone had tagged me in a post in a private group I had been added to years ago and forgotten about, a group for employees and former employees of Reynolds Industrial. I opened it and saw a still image from the retirement dinner video, my father frozen mid-speech, my own face just visible at the back of the room. Underneath, someone had written a short question, tagging me by name. They wanted to know if I had heard what the old man had said about his eldest son and what I was going to do about it. I stared at that question on my phone for a long time. What are you going to do about it? For years, the answer had always been the same. Nothing. I would swallow my pride, shrink myself, and tell myself that some battles were not worth fighting. Now the words on the screen felt like a line someone else had drawn for me, a line between the man I had been and the man I needed to become. That night, after Laura went to bed, I cleared the kitchen table and spread everything out. Printed screenshots of the retirement speech, notes from my talk with my father, messages from the family chat, a short summary of what Nora and Tom had told me, the old letter from Margaret. It looked like a strange lesson plan. Maybe it was. I realized I was building a history of my own life, the way I would build a unit for my students. Except this time, I was also one of the main characters. I stopped thinking about my father as a father for a moment, and tried to see him the way a court or a trust officer might see him, as a man who had made public statements, held certain roles, and now faced the terms of documents he had once agreed to. When I did that, the story changed. He was no longer an all-powerful figure. He was just another person, bound by rules. At our next meeting, I walked into Margaret's conference room with a folder under my arm. I laid out the video clips, my written transcript of the speech, the messages from my father and siblings where they doubled down on the idea that I was not part of the real family. I included a short statement of my own, just a page where I had described, in plain language, how all of it had played out and how it had been received by people inside and outside the company. Margaret read quietly, moving from one page to the next with a steady expression. When she finished, she folded her hands and said that the pattern was clear. She said that under the terms of the trust, there were grounds to review my father's control. She did not sound excited. She sounded careful, like someone checking a bridge before letting anyone walk over it. She explained that there were several possible actions. They all involved paperwork, not drama. Notices to the bank and to the company, internal votes by trustees, formal letters to my father. Some options would only warn him. Others would change how much power he had over the shares and how his decisions could be challenged. I listened and felt that same strange calm I had felt in the garage when I found her old letter. I realized that my grandparents had not trusted any one person with total control, not even their own son. They had built a system, and now that system was quietly waking up. Margaret made it clear that if we moved forward, there would be no way to pretend afterward that this had been a simple misunderstanding. My father would know, Ryan would know, the board would know. I would no longer be the son who stayed in the background. I would be the man who pulled a lever his father did not believe he could reach. She asked me again what I wanted. I told her that I wanted the family name and the company to match the values my grandparents had lived by, not the ones my father shouted about in speeches. I said that I did not need to run the company, but I needed to know that my father could not use our last name as a stage prop while cutting people out of it in public. Margaret nodded slowly. She said that in that case, we would proceed with the tools my grandparents had left behind. She prepared some documents and explained where I needed to sign. The language on the pages was formal and dry, full of words like suspension, review, and contingent authority. I did not understand every term, but I understood the shape of it. This was not revenge. It was a correction. A few days later, I met her at the courthouse and then at the county recorder's office. The buildings were plain, with long hallways and humming lights. There were no cameras, no speeches, no applause, just lines of people with their own papers and their own quiet problems. We waited our turn at a small counter. Margaret slid stamped forms through a gap in the glass. A clerk checked them, stamped them again, and slid them back. It took only a few minutes. Somewhere in the system, something shifted. On paper, my father was not as untouchable as he had been the week before. On the way out, I stopped in the lobby and stood near a window. People moved in and out, carrying files, talking on cell phones, chasing small children. No one looked at me twice. I felt strangely light. For the first time, I was not reacting to my father. I was acting on my own, within rules he could not control. That night, I sat alone in the school parking lot after a long day. The sky was dark, the lot almost empty. The building behind me was quiet, just a few classroom lights still on. I rested my hands on the steering wheel and thought about what would come next. There would be a reaction. My father would not accept any limit on his power without noise. Ryan would see it as an attack on his own future. Chloe would say that I was making everything harder than it needed to be. They would call me ungrateful, disloyal, weak for hiding behind legal words instead of confronting them in person. But I knew now that the only language my father truly respected was written on contracts and recorded in bank records. If I wanted him to hear me, I had to speak in that language. As I sat there, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was an email from a company address. The subject line was Invitation, Legacy, and Leadership Gala. I opened it. The message announced a new event at the same hotel ballroom as the retirement dinner. It would be a night to celebrate my father's legacy and the future under Ryan's leadership. Clients, staff, and close family were invited. Near the end, one sentence stood out. It said that all 3 of Edward Hayes' adult children were requested to stand on stage for a symbolic passing of the torch. At the bottom were 2 buttons, Accept and Decline. I looked at them for a long time, then I tapped Accept. On the night of the gala, the same hotel ballroom looked almost exactly like it had at the retirement dinner. Same white tablecloths, same bright lights, same stage. The only difference was the banner over the podium. It had new words on it about legacy and leadership, but the same last name in big letters. Before we went in, Laura and I waited in a side corridor near the service entrance. The carpet was quieter there, the walls bare. Margaret stood with us, a slim folder in her hand. She checked her watch once and said in a calm voice that the filings were complete and the trust records updated. She added that what would happen inside the room tonight was more about informing people than asking their permission. That sentence sat in the air between us. I adjusted my tie, mostly to have something to do with my hands. Laura touched my sleeve and told me that whatever happened on that stage, I would be walking up there as myself, not as a child begging for a place. I believed her more than I believed anything written on the banners outside. A staff member came down the hall and said that they would start the main program soon, that all family members should be ready near the doors. Margaret moved a little behind us, close enough to see the stage, but not so close that she would be mistaken for a guest. She held the folder like a small, quiet weapon. When we stepped into the ballroom, every table was full. Clients, managers, local officials, their spouses. The buzz of voices rose and fell. On the big screens, a new video played, filled with glossy shots of the factory floor, the trucks, my father shaking hands with people. Ryan appeared again and again, in offices and at trade shows, always in sharp focus. At the end, there was a still image of my father and Ryan together under the company logo, with some slogan about passing the torch. The MC called my father to the stage first. He walked up with the same slow, steady stride as before, soaking in the attention. He thanked everyone for coming, spoke about his long career, and then shifted to talking about the future under Ryan. He praised his true heirs, the ones who, in his words, had stayed in the arena. He did not look at me, even though he had invited all 3 of us to be there. Then the MC asked all 3 adult children to join him on stage for a symbolic moment. There was polite applause. Ryan stepped up first, smiling easily. Chloe followed, playing her role as the polished daughter. I walked up last, feeling the weight of the room's eyes on me. Some people looked openly curious, remembering the retirement dinner. Others looked sideways, as if they were not sure they should be watching this at all. We stood in a line next to my father while the MC talked about family unity and strength. He asked the room to clap for the Hayes legacy. The sound rose up, loud and practiced. For a moment, it was almost like the clip from the first dinner could play again. The same humiliation, the same quiet exit. But before my father could move into whatever he had planned next, Margaret stepped forward from the front row. She lifted one hand slightly to get the MC's attention. When he paused, she introduced herself as legal counsel for the Hayes Holding Trust. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear. The microphones picked it up and carried it across the room. She explained that the trust created by my grandparents was the legal owner of the controlling shares of Reynolds Industrial. She said that, under its terms, the person called founder in the video was not the final authority over that block of shares. She reminded the room that my grandparents had built rules for how control would pass when they were gone. Then she mentioned the clause my grandmother had insisted on. She did not call it a respect clause, but she described it. She said that if a primary beneficiary publicly and repeatedly rejected a legitimate child as part of the family, the co-trustees were obligated to review that person's control. She noted that, in recent months, such statements had been made by the current primary beneficiary in front of large groups, both at the earlier retirement dinner and in other settings. There was a stir in the crowd. People shifted in their seats, phones appeared in hands. On one side of the room, I saw Tom standing near the wall, his arms folded, his eyes fixed on the stage. Margaret continued in the same steady tone. She said that, after reviewing recordings, messages, and witness statements, the co-trustees had formally concluded that the trust's conditions had been triggered. She explained that, as a result, my father's sole voting control over the trust's shares had been suspended. The room went very quiet at that word. She then stated that, under the contingency plan written years ago, voting control now shifted to a different structure, a shared arrangement between the firm and the named successor trustee and beneficiary, me. She said my full name and my role as it appeared in the documents. The words sounded strange and heavy coming through the speakers, but also strangely right. My father turned toward her, his face tight, and said something into the microphone, something about nonsense and disrespect. His voice broke a little on the last word. Margaret did not argue. She simply held up a stamped document and said that the actions had already been filed with the bank and the relevant offices. She added that tonight's announcement was not a request, it was a notice. She also explained, in careful language, that certain planned distributions connected to the trust, including some that would have favored any child who took part in public erasure of another, were now under review and temporarily frozen. She did not name Ryan or Chloe, but everyone in the room could connect the dots. Ryan's smile disappeared. Chloe's hands tightened on the edge of the podium. Around the room, I saw people looking back and forth between us and the big screens, as if trying to match what they were seeing now with the story they had been fed for years. The board chair, who had been sitting near the front, stood halfway up, then sat back down when Margaret handed him a copy of the notice. He read it quickly, his jaw set, then nodded once in a way that said he understood that the rules he had to follow had just changed. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the lights and the clicks of phone cameras. I knew there was an opening then, a small, sharp space where I could decide what, if anything, I wanted to say. I stepped a little closer to the microphone. I kept my hands at my sides. I said that I had not come tonight to take revenge on anyone. I said that my grandparents had built something meant to outlast all of us, and they had written rules to protect it from pride and anger, even their own sons. I added that I had spent most of my life trying to be seen as a real part of this family, but that tonight was not about my feelings. It was about the trust doing what it was designed to do when someone tried to cut a child out of the story in public. I did not raise my voice. I did not look at my father as I spoke. I looked at the workers, the mid-level managers, the people who had seen enough of him to know this was not some random misunderstanding. When I finished, I stepped back from the microphone. No one clapped. For a long second, the room held its breath. Then, slowly, chairs began to scrape. Some people stood, not to applaud, but to talk quietly to each other, to stare at the documents being passed down the front row, to look at my father with new eyes. Tom raised his chin toward me in a small, solid sign of support. Laura's hand found mine and squeezed once. On the edge of the stage, near the podium, there was a row of chairs with name placards. One of them still said, Edward Hayes, Founder, Trust Representative. A staff member from the event team came up, looking uncertain, until Margaret nodded. The staff member took that placard away and replaced it with a new one bearing my name and the trust title Margaret had just announced. My father sat down heavily in his chair, staring at the empty space where his name had been. Around him, phones stayed pointed at the stage, recording the moment his control slipped out of his hands and into the structure his own parents had set up without asking his permission. That was where the night ended for me. Standing on that stage, my name in front of the chair he used to claim automatically, the room full of witnesses buzzing with quiet shock, and my father finally facing rules he could not shout away.